Hello everyone, my name is Gregory Appel and I'm a Senior Program Manager in Microsoft. Today I will be telling you about Excel Services and BI in SharePoint 2016, the new version of SharePoint. We will learn about the changes in the on-premises MSBI stack, and we'll survey the features in the stack in the on-premises environment. So by the end of this session, you should know your way around the new version of the MSBI stack on premises and be savvy of the changes. This session is comprised of two different parts. So the first part talks about the architectural changes, the changes in licensing and terminology, and various upgradeability and compatibility aspects of these changes. The second part will basically survey the features in this new version of the stack. So we will look at the features that got deprecated, features that got changed, and the new features that we introduced. So let's get started. Firstly, let's take a look at the history of Excel services in Microsoft BI Stack so that you can later on explain the rationale of our actions to your customers and understand it yourselves. Excel services got introduced in 2007 as part of the BI stack, and it was the front-end solution for data analysis. In 2013 version of SharePoint Server, we introduced a new thing called Office Web App Server, which was a separate server that could run Office web applications, and it could enable the scale out and unified deployment of various Office web applications such as Word, PowerPoint, OneNote, and Excel. So at that point, we ended up in a rather awkward situation where you could have two different instances of Excel running on premises, and that was rather confusing, both from the standpoint of setup and licensing. The functionality differed between these two instances, so we had a rather cumbersome story around Excel in the on-premises BI stack. So what we are doing in 2016 is basically completing the swap and taking all the capabilities that existed in Excel services and moving them to the Office Web App Server. So Office Web App Server is going to be the sole server that allows for Excel web functionality, Word web functionality, and PowerPoint and OneNote web functionality in the on-premises world. Let's take a closer look at this transition so that you understand it better. But basically, the message here is that Excel Services application for SharePoint that was running on the SharePoint box got deprecated, while its capabilities remain available in the on-premises BI stack through the Office Web Application Server. What we will do is compare the previous version of the stack with the new 2016 version. Let's take a look at the 13 version first. So here we have a few boxes. We have the SharePoint server itself with various add-ins running on top of it. You can see that there is a Power Pivot for SharePoint add-in, Reporting Services add-in, Visio Services application. There's also Performance Point application, and all these different applications have dependencies on Excel Services, which is also an app that run on top of the SharePoint 2013 server. So various flows and various scenarios, various features of these add-ons were dependent on the Excel services. There's also the SSAS server in Power Pivot for SharePoint mode that one would install if one would have workbooks with the data model. So this box used to handle the data model, process it. Both Excel services and the SSAS box could delve into the organizational data sources and refresh the data. In 2013, as I already mentioned, Office Web App Server, or otherwise known as WAC, got introduced, and various Office web applications could run on it. But this server was never really part of the BI stack. A lot of organizations that focused on BI scenarios didn't even bother installing this server because they didn't see use for it. This server in the 2013 version was used by those organizations that required basic Excel web functionality or basic Word web functionality and did not focus on the BI scenarios. And as I already mentioned, the story behind Excel web application and Excel services was rather complex. So you could view workbooks with a data model in Excel services, and you could edit workbooks without the data model in Excel web application over WAC. So that was not a trivial thing. Let's take a look at the 2016 version of this stack and see how it changed. So the first thing you can notice is that WAC had changed its place. So it is now a prominent member of the Microsoft BI stack. You can also see that it changed its name. So it is now called Office Online Server as opposed to Office Web App Server. I still call it WAC. So Office Online Server and WAC, these names can be used interchangeably. It's just that Office Online Server is the new marketing name, while WAC is a name that people can actually pronounce. So that was one change. Another change in the naming had to do with the web applications themselves. So Excel Web App is now called Excel Online. Word Web App is now called Word Online, etc. Let's take a look at what happened to Excel services. Watch this transition. So as I said, Excel services capabilities have moved into Excel Online. That runs on top of Office Online Server in this new version of the stack. One can also see that the other add-ins for SharePoint remain intact. They're still necessary to run scenarios such as scheduled data refresh, or using workbook as a data source, or using embedded Power View sheets, standalone reports, etc. So they're still there, but the new versions of these add-ons know how to work with Excel Online on top of Office Online Server. The old versions of these add-ons would not know how to work with Excel and would actually fail to do that. Excel Online also knows to talk to the SharePoint Server box and integrate with these add-ins, as well as with the SSAS server in Power Pivot for SharePoint mode, which remains in its position. So just to make sure there's no doubt in your mind with regards to scenarios. So using Office Online Server, you can now leverage Excel Online, a single instance of Excel Online, for any scenario, be it viewing or editing a workbook or BI scenarios, using workbook that is connected to all up cubes or organizational, tabular databases or some other sort of database, working with a model, etc. All of that you can do using Excel Online over Office Online Server. Office Online Server has its limitations. So Excel Online that runs on top of this server is susceptible to these limitations. The two most notable ones that you should know about are, first of all, the configurations that were previously done through SharePoint UI can no longer be done through SharePoint UI. So whatever you used to configure through Excel Services UI on top of SharePoint, you should now configure through PowerShell on Office Online Server. Another thing to note is that WAG requires a separate machine. Now, this was also the case with WAG 15, and it remains the case with Office Online Server 2016. Let's move on to the next slide. So let's review the benefits of this new architecture. What is it we're actually achieving with this? So first of all, as I said, the customers get a single path to success. So with Excel Online on top of the Office Online Server, we provide all Excel web functionality, including self-service BI. And we do not have these different instances of Excel, different license requirements, and different setup steps. Another thing that we do is we alleviate the footprint of Excel services on the SharePoint server. So basically, there's no longer an Excel services application running on top of SharePoint, and you do not need to scale out SharePoint server farm for the sake of Excel services. Performance of SharePoint server would also benefit from this. Another notable difference is that with the new version of Excel Online and with the new version of WAG, you are actually going to get the latest and greatest functionality that was available in Office 365. So all the goodness that we have developed during the last 2 years is going to be available in this new version. And one other thing to note is that Office Online Server is evergreen. So what does that mean? Microsoft Office have made a rather big switch from creating products to creating services. And what it means for the sake of this discussion is that when you're installing this evergreen application, this evergreen server, it means you will be able to get updates on a regular basis and have new functionality arrive to you on a regular cadence. Whatever the improvements we make in Office 365, we will be making in the on-premises world as well, and IT administrators would be free to install it and upgrade their service in a continuous fashion. What it also brings is significantly reduced time between an ask of the customer and the availability of this feature or this improvement in production. So if up until now we used to create major versions, like every 3 years you would get a big major version released by Microsoft, and this major version would contain a lot of features, a lot of different bug fixes and improvements, a lot of testing of all these features would be put into this. Nowadays, we tend to do this in small increments. So we're releasing a version every 3 or 4 months, and this version would contain whatever we were able to deliver in this time period. Not necessarily develop in this time period, but deliver. So we could be developing a feature for a year, and then once it gets delivered and tested, we could ship it on a more or less immediate basis, which was not the case previously. So we would wait for the big release of the major product, and only then release a feature. So a customer who would ask for a feature could wait as long as a few years in order to get it, and by that point it would largely be irrelevant for that customer. Nowadays, a customer could get a feature let's be realistic, in a matter of a year. So that is a big improvement. Key takeaways. The first takeaway is that Excel Services is now part of Excel Online 2016. Office Online Server is a mandatory server. So, for example, Excel web parts on SharePoint will not work without you having an Office Online Server installed and binded to the SharePoint. Various features that are dependent on Excel, features of Power Pivot for SharePoint Server or Visio services, reporting services, would not work. So reporting services standalone would still work. Visio services scenarios where it does not utilize Excel would still work. But those scenarios that do utilize Excel will not function without the Office Online Server. Configuring Excel Online via PowerShell is something that comes with the territory. Those of you who have been configuring WAC 15 know how to do that already. Those of you who do not know this will have to learn how to do that. And the new architecture benefits are the things that we have covered in the previous slide. So all Excel web functionality is under one roof. BI scenarios, viewing, editing of workbooks, refreshing this workbooks, accessing external data can all be done using this single instance. Improved scalability of servers. You do no longer have to scale SharePoint server farms for the sake of Excel services. Excel services is now part of a different server. And staying up to date with new features, improvements, and bug fixes is a rather significant improvements, especially for analysts, people who utilize the BI functionality. It is quite important. Terminology. So, as I already mentioned, we had a few changes to the terminology, a few new brand names introduced. This was done by marketing, so don't shoot the messenger. In the on-premises and in cloud environments, Excel is now called Excel Online, so there is no differentiation between on-premise and cloud environment. In both cases, Excel is called Excel Online. So whenever you read documentation about Excel Online, be wary of the fact that it might pertain to one or the other environment. You should know and try to find out which environment it actually relates to. So the way for you to find out is to see what sort of server it runs on. Office Online Server is the name for the on-premises WAC, and Office Online without the server is the name for the cloud WAC data center. SKU changes. You can later on review this table in detail if and when you will decide to download this deck from the website. I will just give you the bottom line. And the bottom line is it is now possible to access external data using SharePoint Standard Cal. So we no longer require Enterprise Cal licenses in order to access external data such as organizational all-up cubes, tabular databases. Working with a model, it can also be done using standard Cal licenses, although do remember that SQL licenses still apply, so we do not cancel out SQL licenses. We are relaxing SharePoint licensing terms. And the reason we do that is because we feel that more people should adopt BI scenarios and will be able to do so with these relaxed licensing requirements. Nowadays, we learn that workbooks that utilize external data are becoming a commodity. So we do want to allow people to use such workbooks within their on-premises BI stacks. I believe it also makes our offering more competitive, simply because it should become cheaper for our customers to handle and install BI farms. SharePoint Enterprise CAL is still necessary for those add-ons that run on top of SharePoint Server. So if you want to utilize Power Pivot for SharePoint functionality, such as schedule data refresh, or using workbooks as a data source, or Power Pivot Gallery, IT management dashboard, etc., these are the sort of functionalities that still require Enterprise CAL licenses. That's all with regards to SKU changes. Right, so we get to the slide that describes upgradability and compatibility aspects of the architectural change. So here we can see the BI stack, and we can see the Excel Desktop Client 2016 version. If you author workbooks in Excel 2016 Desktop Client, they will work and will function within the MSBI Stack 2016. If you author workbooks with your old Excel Desktop Client 2013 version, those workbooks will also work in the new version of the MSBI Stack. For the removal of doubt, the add-ins, the SharePoint add-ins, need to the ones that need to be installed on the SharePoint Server 2016 are the new add-ins. You cannot install Power Pivot for SharePoint 2013 on SharePoint 2016. It will not work. So you need the new versions for the new server. What if you upgrade your Office Online Server and you do not upgrade your SharePoint Server? This configuration will work. You will be able to access external data. You will be able to work with the model, but you will not be able to leverage the functionality of the SharePoint add-ins. And this is because old SharePoint add-ins and old SharePoint Server do not integrate with the new Office Online Server. Okay, so there is no integration between the legacy version, the 2013 version, and the new version. This topology, where we remain with the old WAC and we upgrade SharePoint to the 2016 version, this topology is not supported. WAC 13 does not integrate with SSAS or the SharePoint BI add-ons. Customers are basically advised to upgrade their WAC service prior to their SharePoint servers. Now, this kind of topology, where you upgrade the SharePoint and the Office Online Server, but you remain with the legacy version of SSAS, is supported, okay, but it is not recommended. The reason it is not recommended is because if you happen to author your workbooks with the 2016 desktop client, this 2016 desktop client may utilize new DAX functions, and these new DAX functions will not be able to function correctly, on SSAS 2014. So customers are advised to upgrade their AS service prior to other services in the BI stack. Effectively, what it means is that recommended upgrade sequence is bottom up. So you should upgrade your SSAS in PowerPool to SharePoint mode, then you should upgrade your WAG 15 to Office Online Server, and only later should you upgrade your SharePoint Server. And by the way, if you paid attention, you don't have to upgrade the SharePoint Server in case you do not utilize the add-on functionality. So if you only need to have workbooks connected to an external data source, utilizing data models or utilizing organizational roll-up cubes, you don't really need to upgrade the SharePoint Server anymore. Key takeaways. If you want to utilize all of the MSBI stack functionality, you need to upgrade the MSBI stack in its entirety. Accessing external data without upgrading SharePoint Server is possible. Okay, so to access external data, including the use of data model, connectivity to all or tabular, neither the SharePoint Server nor the SQL add-ons need to be upgraded. Upgrading the stack bottom up is what we advise. That would be the most natural way for us to approach this. And Microsoft BI Stack 2016 is backward compatible with earlier Excel clients. So workbooks created in previous versions of Excel Desktop Client can be utilized in the new 2016 stack. And here we basically come to the second part of our session, where we will go over the features and the changes that we've done in the feature set. So there's a bunch of deprecated features, a small bunch I must say, and all of those are admin facing, so there's no impact on the end users. There are a few features that have changed. For example, they could bear configuration changes, such as you might have had a feature that was configurable through SharePoint UI, and now it is configurable through WAC PowerShell. So that's one type of change. Another type of change, you might have a feature that has a changed set of prerequisites. So we will look at these changed features more closely, and all of them are also admin facing, so there is no impact on the end user here as well. And then we will go over the new features. We will take a look at what is it we're actually providing as the new value, additional value in this version. Deprecated features. So three things stand out here. First, it is the trusted data providers. Trusted data providers was a command and control feature in Excel services, and the feedback we got from the market was that it is really a redundant piece of configuration, and it can still be achieved by installing or uninstalling Office Online Server data providers. Trusted file locations is also deprecated, but the way to think about it is not deprecation. It is rather that Excel Online no longer enforces a trusted file location. So just as before, the trusted file location used to default to the whole SharePoint server. It was HTTP */ or something. So in Excel Online, trusted file location is no longer enforced, and we can consume a workbook from any SharePoint server, any SharePoint location. Another thing that we have changed is the use of Excel Online from SharePoint Central admin side and using managed accounts. Now this became a security concern because Excel services moved to a different server. So one thing we would not want to happen is for SharePoint IT admin credentials to become available on a different server, be shared with a different server. So we disabled this functionality. And as I already mentioned, there are a few global settings and a few Excel services commandlets that got deprecated. I'm not going to go through these, but do know that there's a slide on the deprecated global settings. You will be able to study it later offline if it is of interest. And there's also a slide on the deprecated commandlets. Here we arrived at the changed features. All changes are administrator facing. End user experience is not impacted. Let's take a look at what features have changed. Firstly, Excel Web Parts has different prerequisite. You now need an Office Online Server for an Excel Web Part to work. Rather trivial after we looked at the architectural changes, isn't it? Secondly, the use of data connection library is now optional and not mandatory. So similarly to what we've done with the trusted file location, Excel Online will no longer enforce the data connection library as the only location where ODC files are allowed to live. Excel Online will now be able to consume an ODC file from any SharePoint location. There is a new prerequisite to the ODC file, and we will review it in more detail on the next slide. User-defined function assemblies used to be deployed, so the DLLs used to be deployed on the SharePoint box, and they were run by the Excel services. Now that these capabilities have moved to the Office Online Server, the same user-defined function assemblies, the same DLLs, should be deployed on the Office Online Server. And there are additional PowerShell commandlets on this on this server for this purpose. ODC file support has changed prerequisites. So one thing I have already mentioned, the DCLs are no longer enforced, so you can actually store your ODC files wherever you want. Due to Office Online Server being a separate server, there is now a need to establish trust between SharePoint and Office Online Server. This has not been the case previously. So we have introduced a new feature, a new security feature called server-to-server authentication. And this needs to be configured in order for WAC to be able to fetch and consume an ODC file from a SharePoint server. IT Management Dashboard also has changed prerequisites. In SharePoint, in SharePoint 2016, IT Dashboard workbooks have to be deployed on a regular SharePoint site and not on the central admin. As I mentioned previously, the use of Excel workbooks from a central admin site has been disabled for security concerns. Also, IT Management Dashboard used to consume usage logs from Excel services and present them in a nice and aggregated way to the administrator, so that the administrator can manage the usage. Now the usage logs come from Office Online Server. So again, there is a need for server-to-server authentication in order to be able to fetch these logs. Workbook as a data source has a similar story, so also prerequisites have changed. Now that you have two separate boxes, you need to configure KCD on SharePoint between SharePoint and Office Online Server. So basically, it is a KCD. It is a SharePoint-based KCD configuration. As far as I'm aware, most BI farms already have KCD configured on SharePoint, so this should not be too painful an issue. And the last slide on the changed features. Basically, external data access requirements have changed a little bit. SSAS has to be configured to trust the Office Online Server. SSAS was not aware up until now about such a server. So we need to be able to configure SSAS to trust this server. And for this purpose, SSAS servers need to have their management studio upgraded. So for removal of doubt, you do not need to upgrade your organizational OLAP cubes or tabular databases. You do need to upgrade the SQL Server Management Studio in order to establish trust with the Office Online Server. Right. Effective username simply changed the place where it should be configured. It is now toggled via Office Online Server PowerShell. And using workbooks connected to data sources with Windows-based authentication has changed again, because there are now more hops. In order to use this functionality, you need to configure KCD between the Office Online Server and the data source. This is done by switching on claims to Windows token servers on the WAC server. So again, it's not shouldn't be too painful to do. So here I'm mentioning another white paper that had been issued by the SQL group, and this white paper describes the same story essentially, but from the perspective of SQL and of the BI features available through SQL add-ons for SharePoint. Very much advisable. So for those of you who are interested in configuration steps and a better level or a deeper level of detail, should really read this white paper. And here we come to the new features in the Excel Online 2016. We will also there are also slides about the new features in SharePoint 2016 and Office Online Server 2016. So I'm differentiating between these three components. In Excel Online, there are essentially a few reasons to upgrade. So more Excel features, essentially all the goodness that was developed in the past 2 years for the cloud and available through Office 365 will now become available in the on-premise environment as well. Robust and unified deployment is something that we have covered in the previous slides. You now know that Excel Online can be installed on the Office Online Server together with other Office web applications. Keeping workbooks updated via SharePoint Standard Cal. So there are actually two things to note here. First of all, in a previous version of Microsoft BI Stack, the way for you to keep a workbook updated was to schedule a data refresh that would refresh the workbook in the background and save it in the refreshed state. In Microsoft in Excel Online 2016, you no longer need schedule data refresh solely for this purpose, because you now can actually open up the workbook, refresh the data, and save the workbook, which is not something you could have done in the previous version, at least not for all of those data sources that are now available and possible. And the second thing to note is the SharePoint Standard Cal requirement, which is a relaxation compared to SharePoint eCal requirement. And as I already mentioned, Office Online Server is evergreen. It is now possible to stay up to date with the regular update cadence, and Excel Online on-prem will get same features and improvements as in O365. So the way it will happen is that Office 365 will get updated monthly or weekly. Very frequent updates will get issued, and every 4 months or so, those same updates would arrive to the on-premises servers. So that's also a relatively frequent update cadence that you will be able to leverage. SQL Server 2016. So what are the top reasons to upgrade? First of all, the Power Pivot add-ons for SharePoint 2016 are the ones that support Excel Online. Okay, the previous versions of Power Pivot for SharePoint do not support Excel Online on top of Office Online Server. Scheduled Data Refresh will now support refresh of Excel workbooks with Power Query. And that is basically bringing the Scheduled Data Refresh on premises on the par with the O365 functionality. You can upgrade the data model using Power Query connection strings. By the way, what I didn't mention in the previous slide was that I will actually go over the particular Excel features that are listed here in more details in subsequent slides. I believe they're there. Here it is also important to note that data model PQ refresh is also available through Excel, so it will be available interactively by pressing the refresh all button or via the scheduled data refresh. Back to SQL Server 2016. SQL Server analysis services now support workbooks authored in Excel 2016. So I already mentioned new DAX functions are available there and are utilized by some of the new Excel features. There were also performance improvements, so more responsive BI experience is provided. SharePoint integrated reporting services in 2016 have a set of improvements. So the first one I'd like to mention is that the Silverlight is no more for the standalone SSRS reports. They are now rendered through HTML5. SSRS also offers new chart types and a new version of Report Builder. So this is, in my opinion, rather significant. With regards to SharePoint Server 2016, we have scale out improvements for large environments, both because Excel services is no longer there and because a new feature called MinRoll got introduced, which really improves the ability to do capacity planning and optimize scalability in large environments. If you're not familiar with the MinRoll feature, I suggest you familiarize yourselves. It's a really nice one. You can now basically dedicate a SharePoint server deployment for a particular purpose. It could be for the purpose of being a front-end application handler, or application business logic processing server, or a server that handles the SharePoint database. Security and data protection improvements have also been introduced, notably data loss prevention, DLP technology, and support for encrypted email communication. And SharePoint 2016 is also evergreen, so you will also get regular updates, regular delivery of new features and new improvements that will also be made available in Office 365. Let's see what else I have here. Okay, so I don't actually have the slides on Excel features. That's a shame. Let me move back and just recap on these features in a bit more detail before we finish up. So we have made available a search and filters. So you might know that in pivot tables in Excel there was this common problem that there could be a lot of values to go through when you wanted to filter something by a value. And we now introduced search within these values, within filters, and that should facilitate the use of pivot tables. Value field settings got improved. It is now on the par with Excel desktop value field settings functionality. A viewport is now saved, so whenever a user comes back to a workbook in Excel Web, they would come back to the same position in the workbook. Number formatting got introduced, so you can actually customize the way you see numbers, similarly to how you do it in Excel Desktop. Print selection is there. Insert comments is there, perhaps one of the most awaited features. You can now review workbooks, which was one of the common scenarios for using Excel Web. People wanted to be able to review Excel-based reports and leave their comments, so now they're able to do that via Excel Web. There are some programmability and extensibility improvements. So Excel JavaScript APIs got extended. For those of you who are not familiar with Excel JavaScript APIs, these APIs basically strive to provide the same sort of functionality that Visual Basic for Application provides. They're not there yet, but they expose the Excel object model through JavaScript APIs, and they gradually add new bits and pieces from this object model and additional methods to basically provide the same capabilities that are available in VBA. And data model Power Query Refresh is also available, as I already mentioned. So that is it. If we just recap quickly on what we have seen in this session, we've seen the architectural changes together with SKU changes and terminology changes that occurred in the new version of Microsoft BI Stack. And we have quickly reviewed the features and the changes in the existing feature set that transpired in this new version. There is a slide on related content, and I very much advise for those of you who are interested in details about the changes, about the Microsoft BI Stack in general, to visit these links. Notably, the SQL 2016 BI white paper has a lot of relevant and useful material, so very much advisable. And that's it. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you for listening. You're welcome to download this deck from the website. Bye-bye.